turning to James 3. James chapter 3. That'll be the basis of our study here tonight. James chapter 3. Before we get into James 3, though, to quickly go over our outline of the book, as well as the theme of the book of James, and then we'll get into chapter 3. The book of James is about being a doer of the word. And our outline, we've divided it down into 3 sections. The first of those being overcoming trials of faith. That is chapter 1, verses 1 through 18. The section we're familiar with about count it all joy when you fall into various trials is found there in verse 2 of chapter 1. And so that main first section, the first 18 verses are about overcoming trials. The second section, which we're in for most of the rest of the book, it covers the largest portion by far, and that is not only do you need to overcome trials of faith, here's how you need to be living your faith. So you need to be a doer of the word, 1:19-27. Do not be partial, 2:1-13. Have faith with works, 2:14-26. Control your tongue, 3:1-13. You need to have wisdom, 3:13 through 18. You need to draw near to God, chapter 4, 1-12. You need to rely on God, 4:13 through chapter 5, and in verse 6. And then the final section is about faith's triumph, how it is patient, 5:7-12. It prays for others, 13-18, and works to restore those who are erring, 19 and 20. We're in chapter 3. We're in the second section. Several subsections in, 2 of them in tonight's study in James 3. That is about the tongue and about wisdom. James chapter 3, the key verse, or in this case key verses, is verse 2 and 13. Again, as we said, there are times in James where we seem to take an almost drastic, sudden change of topic. And these 2 topics tie together on the tongue and wisdom, and we can tie those together when we get there. But as we're talking about them, there are 2 more main sections, and so we have 2 main verses, one summarizing each section. The first of those is verse 2. For we all stumble in many things. If anyone does not stumble in word, he is a perfect man, able also to bridle the whole body. The second one is verse 13. Who is wise and understanding among you? Let him show by good conduct that his works are done in the meekness of wisdom. And so that summarizes both sections. He's talking about controlling the tongue. Verse 2 summarizes that for us. And he's talking about wisdom, particularly needing heavenly wisdom and not earthly wisdom. Verse 13 summarizes that for us. Into chapter 3 itself, let's go ahead here and get question number 1. Briefly summarize the chapter. So again, somebody asks you, what's James 3 about? You have 2 or 3 sentences, 1 to 3 sentences to summarize it. How do you summarize it in just a few sentences and say, here's what James 3 is about?
Holding your tongue.
Holding your tongue. So that's the main section that we're most familiar with. And then what's the other part? It's really about the need for wisdom, particularly what he's focusing on is the need for heavenly wisdom and not earthly wisdom. Let's get into the first section now, 1-12 on the tongue. Now what he says first in verse 1 is, my brethren, let not many of you become teachers, knowing that we shall receive the stricter judgment. Now, I used to have an outline where I had this separate. I've seen several outlines where you have verse 1, let not many be teachers, and then 2 through 12, the need to control the tongue. But these sections go together. And I think as you tie that into verse 3, in fact, go ahead and look at question 2. I think let not many be teachers. What are the 2 reasons? One's given in verse 1, and I think the other's given in verse 2. Verse 1, let not many be teachers knowing what?
You held a stricter judgment.
You'll incur stricter judgment. You're going to give an account for how you taught others. In teaching, you've heard the saying, of whom much is given, much is expected, right? And so you're somebody that's spending time in teaching. You're going to give an account not just for how you've conducted yourself in your life, but conducted yourself in your teaching, what you taught, and the effect that had. But I do think there's a second reason that's given, is particularly tying into the need for judgment. Verse 2 has a very important 3-letter word at the beginning. And that is, at least in the New King James, the way it's translated is for. We all stumble in many things. You've heard me say it before. If you see words like for and therefore, we need to go back. Well, what has he just said? Let not many be teachers. No one will incur stricter judgment. So verse 2, for we all stumble in many things. If anyone does not stumble in word, he is a perfect man, able also to bridle the whole body. And so these two sections tie together, and I think the point he's making as you go from 1 to 2, first of all, you incur stricter judgment. So remember, you're already going to have to give an account for how you've conducted yourself, being a doer, chapter 1, controlling your tongue. But I think he's tying it in with the teaching there. When you're teaching by word, and some people will make mistakes in word in a number of ways. And we'll talk about some of that here in a second. And if you don't stumble in word, you're a perfect man able to bridle your whole body. And if you're a teacher, you're going to incur stricter judgment. So you've got to be careful what you say. Now, everybody's got to be careful what they say. But let not many be teachers because of the difficulty of bridling the tongue as well as the stricter judgment.
The Hebrew writer said at the time, you ought to be teaching. Everyone, maybe not in the public sense, but everyone, New Testament Christian, is commissioned to go out and teach those that are outside the body of Christ, and actually even to edify those who are already Christians. So this is not, at face value, a discouragement from people who come to teach, because we have to harmonize it with all those other scriptures.
No, you're right. In fact, I think as you tie those together, it's really a warning here as we're dealing with some people that, remember, as we go back, they're having some trouble with the fact that they're just not conducting themselves how they need to be in their everyday walks of life. They need to be doers. They're hearers only. There needs to be a reminder, while we need to be teachers, remember you're going to give stricter judgment. Somebody that's not qualified to teach shouldn't be the one teaching. And that person says, well, I think I can handle it, but they're not ready. Guess what? You're still going to give an account for how you taught. And so you're right. I think as you take those and harmonize that together, that helps us understand there that it's not contradictory that we need to be teachers. But you need to make sure that you can be a teacher and shouldn't just be teaching out there thinking, well, I should just go teach. You need to make sure that you're able to.
I think also there in Romans chapter, let's see, it's 2, Paul said there, he said, you therefore that teach another, do you not teach yourself? You are preaching a man shall not steal. Do you steal? You say do not commit adultery. Do you commit adultery? And so forth and so on. But the point being, Jesus' Sermon on the Mount, he said, blessed are those that do and teach. He didn't say those that teach. He said that those that do and teach. And then what Paul says here, you that teach another. So if there's an inconsistency in what I teach, even though it may be perfect, I may be perfectly qualified to teach, I may have the knowledge. If I'm not first applying this to myself, then there's going to be that stricter judgment in that sense also.
No, you're right, and your teaching is less effective when you're not living it. There's the hypocritical judgment. But you're right, we've got to make sure we're making application. I think of Deuteronomy, where the parents are told there in Deuteronomy that they need to follow it, and then they need to teach it diligently to their children. Ezra prepared his heart to seek the Lord, and then he went out and he taught others. Let's get to verse 2 in more detail now. Verse 2, for we all stumble in many things. If anyone does not stumble in word, he is a perfect man, able to bridle the whole body. So the point he begins with is we all stumble in many things. You go back, and we talked about this even going back to chapter 1, that people have different things they may be pulled away by. And we talk about temptation, but people have things that they can be pulled by. And not forget the tongue for a minute. We're dealing with that in detail. Just different things other than that of the tongue that may pull one away. But if someone doesn't stumble in word, he's a perfect man. Now again, our word perfect, the word there has the idea of being mature. He's a mature man able to bridle the whole body. And I think this is the point that we need to understand. Is not that we cannot watch what we say. We can. It's that I think the point, there's never going to be a point in your life at which you can say, you know what, I have perfectly mastered the tongue. Use the illustration here. He talks about bridling. He goes on to talk about horses and stuff. You ever trained an animal, maybe you trained you have a dog and you train it and you say sit, and then early on you're having to tell that dog to sit and you're having to teach it. Maybe you give it a treat or something when the dog sits and you're trying to reward it, teaching them to sit. Then there comes a point where you just tell the dog sit, and what? The dog listens. They've been trained, and when you say sit, they sit. You say, whatever it is. There never becomes a point in our tongue that we've tamed it to the point that we can say, you know what, I don't have to worry about that anymore. I'm still always having to work on it. And I think in large part, question sometimes comes, why is that? I think in particular because the tongue, I think you could sin in more ways with the tongue than you can with anything else. You can sin by lying, sin by saying something out of anger. You can sin by gossiping. You can sin by false teaching. And you just go on down the list. There's just so many ways that one can sin with the tongue. And maybe you're dealing with this area over here, but there's still this area over here you can sin with the tongue. There's so many ways you can sin. We're always working. Now, that's true with everything, but in particular, as he's focusing here, the tongue. There's never a point that we can say, you know what, I've got it. I don't have to worry about it anymore. Well, what he does now in 3 to 8 is he then illustrates the point of the tongue by comparing the fact that it is small, but it is powerful. And he uses 3 illustrations in 3 through 8, or 3 through 6 rather. The illustrations are, verse 3, the bit in a horse's mouth. Indeed, we put bits in horses' mouths that they may obey us, and we turn their whole body. So if you've ever trained a horse, I haven't trained a horse. I've seen horses after they're trained, ridden on them, and you put that in their mouth, and you're training them with the bit, and you're having to teach them, and they call it breaking the horse. And then you get to the point, you broke the horse, and the horse is trained, but how did you get it there? Used a bit. When you think about a horse is a big animal, and the bit is rather small, yet you use it to what? Control the horse. Verse 4, look also at ships. Although they are so large and driven by fierce winds, they are turned by a very small rudder, wherever the pilot desires. Think about ships, and otherwise, the ships back then are nowhere near the size of the ships that we even have today, but you think about how large a ship is, and then there's that small rudder, and yet what does it do? It turns that wherever the pilot desires to go. It's small, but it serves a very powerful purpose. Now 5 and 6 then, he illustrates that with fire, and I want to spend a second here. We actually have a question over it in a minute. But in verse 5 he says, even so the tongue is a little member and boasts great things. See how great a forest a little fire kindles. And the tongue is a fire, a whirl of iniquity. The tongue is so set among our members that it defiles the whole body and sets on fire the course of nature and is set on fire by hell. Now I want to come to question 3 here. I want to spend a second on this. Why is fire a very fitting comparison for the tongue?
Well, you can have the smallest fire, and like I said, it can destroy a whole forest.
Mm-hmm.
You can have the smallest word or the smallest phrase can ruin everything. They both can cause death.
Absolutely. So something small can cause such destruction. Another reason I think the tongue compared to fire is a very fitting illustration is because fire is not always bad. We're focusing on the tongue and dealing with controlling the tongue. That is, there's sin with the tongue, and we've got to learn to deal with that and not sin. But I want you to think about fire for a minute. It's warmer right now, but when it was freezing out, you might have a fireplace that you light a fire in. Or you may be out camping and you cook over a fire. Right? Even your if you have a gas stove and you light it, there's that flame. There's a little bit of fire there. Right? Fire can serve a good purpose. But I've said, I've used this illustration before, what if we took a fire, instead of having it in a fireplace, and you put it in the middle of your living room floor? What's that going to do? Well, that's going to cause destruction. It's not contained, it's left out to itself, and it's going to cause destruction. You think back just within the last couple of months, all that happened out in California with the wildfire. A few small fires that became thousands and thousands of acres and caused millions of dollars of destruction and widespread damage. Why is that? Well, there was a small fire that eventually became uncontained, and it began to cause damage. Now, I don't know how they started, but it might have been a campfire that wasn't properly put out, that at the beginning was a good fire. But if that's left and not contained and it gets out, that's what causes damage. So too does the tongue. The tongue can be used for good. I think that's something we've got to understand about the tongue. And again, comparing it to fire, the tongue, we often focus on the negative with it, but the tongue can be used for good. How? Well, to going and teaching the gospel. How else are you going to teach the gospel? I mean, you could, I guess, write something down, but in reality, you're still using words in a sense, maybe not speaking with the tongue. But you use your tongue and you go and teach somebody the gospel message. That's a good use of the tongue. Edifying somebody. That's a good use of the tongue. Right? There are a number of ways we can use the tongue and it be used for good. Just like a fire within the fireplace or a fire within the grill or the stove. But on the other hand, that tongue, when it's not controlled, like that wildfire, like that house fire, it begins to run crazy and it can cause mass destruction. And what one says can cause a lot of heartache and can cause a lot of issues. And so the tongue's like fire in the sense that it can be good when used the right way, but when it's left to itself and not in control, it's...
In reality, the tongue is just a manifestation of what's in our heart. Jesus said, out of the heart proceeds this, and this. So in the deepest sense, our center of intellect, or mind, or Bible heart, whatever you want to call it, we got to get that right. And maybe most of us don't go around saying curse words. We've just trained our heart. That's not something we do. But I may look at gossip or something like that as a lesser thing. And I may be prone to that. So what do I got to do? I got to go in there in my heart, study about it, pray about it, and convince my heart that this also is wrong. And if I can get my heart right in that matter, that transformation of the heart that Romans 12, then I'm going to be more apt to be able to control it. Like you said, not that I could ever just say I've mastered this, and just put it away. It's going to be something that constantly going to rear its ugly head. But in the deepest sense, we have to get our heart right.
No, you're right. No, you're right. And again, I think that's why, and we'll get to 7 through 8 again in a minute, talking about taming the tongue. Why I think the tongue is talked about as, well, listen, if you can control the tongue, you can control your whole body, because there's again, so many areas, and we may not be using curse words, but then we may be spreading gossip or spreading lies or spreading things out of bitterness, whatever it may be, that there's so many other ways that one can sin with it. Which brings us to the point of 7 through 8, again, that no man can tame the tongue. For every kind of beast and bird of reptile and creature of the sea is tamed and has been tamed by mankind. But no man can tame the tongue. It is an unruly evil full of deadly poison. If you've ever gone, I haven't been, but I've seen some of them online. If you go to somewhere like the Sea World or something like that, where they've got you've got the dolphins and you've got at least you used to have killer whales and everything, and they've got them trained, and or a seal, and they put on a show. You ever seen that? Where they take the animal and they teach the seal to balance the ball on its nose. They've got a dolphin jumping and doing tricks, whatever it is. How did they get that to happen? Well, they worked till they had it tamed, just like breaking the horse, just like teaching the dog when I say sit, sit, right? But the tongue, no man can tame the tongue. And again, not that we cannot watch what we say. We cannot get to the point that we don't have to worry about it. So again, let's go back to the illustration. You train the dog, sit. You tell it again, sit. And again, you may have a treat. And when the dog sits, I remember training dog before, and you tell them to sit, and you give them the treat. You tell them to sit, you give them the treat, and you work with them. And then there gets to the point where they're only sitting at the beginning for the treat, and then at the end you say sit, and they just sit. Because now they know when he says sit, I need to sit, right? That's when they're tamed. You don't have to be working on that again. But that's not the case. There's never a time where we can say, you know what, I've got it completely under control, and I don't have to worry about lying. I don't have to worry about gossiping. I don't have to worry about other evil uses of the tongue. There's never a point at which we can say, you know what, I've got it so tamed that I don't have to worry about it anymore. And that's the point of 7 through 8. Now, 9 through 12 then, he comes and talks about the reason he's got to deal with the tongue is their inconsistent use of the tongue. And that is, there's a problem here to the people that James is writing to where they're using their tongue inconsistently. So here's what he says, verse 9 and 10, you bless God, yet you curse your fellow man with your tongue. With it, that is with the tongue, we bless God and Father, our God and Father, and with it we curse men who have been made in the similitude of God. Out of the same mouth proceed blessing and cursing. My brethren, these things ought not to be so. So he said, we bless God. We praise God with our tongue, and then we turn around and we're cursing our fellow man who's made in the similitude of God. Now, similitude is probably not a word you use every day, but as the footnote of the New King James puts it, in easier terms that we use more common, in the likeness of God. Let us make man, Genesis 1, in our image. Man is made in the likeness of God. And we sit over here and we bless God, and yet we turn around with the same tongue that we bless God with, and we curse man who's made in the likeness of God. He's saying out of the mouth we're proceeding our blessings and our cursing, and that just ought not be so. And so what he does then is he illustrates that point about their tongue and compares it to a couple of things. One is the spring, and the other would be a fig tree or a grapevine, and a grapevine. Look at verse 11 first. Does a spring send forth both fresh water and bitter from the same opening? Go to the end of verse 12. Thus no spring yields both salt water and fresh. You go to a spring, it's fresh water, or you may have salt water. You're not going to have both fresh and salt water. And the point is, you're using your tongue and you're blessing, and then you're cursing, and it's as if you're trying to get fresh and salt water out of the same spring. The other one again is the fig tree and the grapevine. Can a fig tree, my brethren, bear olives? Can a grapevine bear figs? If you want figs, where should you go look? Fig tree. You should not go trying to find figs on a grapevine. Grapevines are going to produce grapes. You should not try to get olives off of a fig tree. Right? So, and that's the point he's making. You can't, here's one thing and you're expecting something else from it. And his point is, that sounds crazy, and yet that's how you're using your tongue. Here's your tongue that you're blessing God and cursing your fellow man, as if you're expecting a fig tree with figs and olives. You're expecting a grapevine with grapes and figs. You're expecting a spring with fresh and salt water. That's just not possible. That's not going to happen, and yet that's how they're using the tongue. What he's encouraging them here is about avoiding this inconsistent use of the tongue. We cannot bless God and then turn around and try to curse our fellow man. We're blessing God, and we need to bless man who's made in the image of God. Now, that's the section on the tongue. And verse 13 now is the second section, our second key verse as well, verse 13. And as I said, they seem like two very different sections, and there is a sudden change. We're talking about the tongue, and then all of a sudden it's, who's wise and understanding among you? It almost seems like a sudden change. Again, like you see in the book of Proverbs, which James has been compared to. But while there does seem to be a sudden shift, again, the two, just like when we talked about in chapter 2, are not mutually exclusive. How do you control your tongue? Well, you need some wisdom. And wisdom will help you control the tongue. But now let's focus on what he says about wisdom. First, wisdom is shown by conduct. Who is wise and understanding among you? Let him show by good conduct that his works are done in meekness and wisdom. Somebody may come and say, you know what, I'm really wise. And then they turn around and they live in a certain way, and you say, you know what, that person's a fool. They may claim to be wise, but you may say that person's foolish. Why? By the way they are living, the way they conduct themselves. How do we know if somebody's really wise? They show it in their conduct. And so, if somebody has this true wisdom, we're going to talk about the wisdom from above, heavenly wisdom versus earthly wisdom. If somebody has heavenly wisdom, the wisdom that we need, the wisdom from God, somebody has that wisdom, when you look at their conduct, they're going to conduct themselves in the meekness of wisdom. They're going to be doing the works of God. They're going to be a doer of the Word. Again, going back to the beginning, this whole theme of the book, the phrase may only occur in verse 22 through 25, but the whole theme of the book is be a doer of the Word, particularly this middle section. And that's what we're dealing with here. Person with wisdom is going to show you by their conduct because they're doing the Word. They're living the Word. So, wisdom is shown by our conduct. What he then shows is about two different types of wisdom. There's earthly wisdom, the wisdom from below, that's sensual and demonic, and then there is the heavenly wisdom. About both wisdoms, he mentions three things. The character of the wisdom, its origin, and its fruit. Or here's how that wisdom looks in your life. Here's where that wisdom comes from. Here's where the result of having that kind of wisdom. Verse 14. But if you have bitter envy and self-seeking in your hearts, do not boast and lie against the truth. So again, we're going to get back to in a minute as he talks about this wisdom that's earthly. But what he said first is that if you have bitter envy and you are self-seeking, do not boast against the truth because you don't have the wisdom that we're talking about in verse 13. You don't have the kind of wisdom you need because you don't have good conduct. The character of bitter envy and self-seeking is the character that results from having a wisdom that is earthly in nature. And so if that's your character, then you have...
Backing up as we think about the tongue, those things the other tongue might be lies, it might be cursing, it might be gossip, it might be a number of things. But if we go to Philippians chapter 1, where Paul wrote to the church at Philippi, here was something, it's a very unusual situation. They were preaching the truth, because Paul said rather, as far as their motive goes, in pretense or out of love, he rejoiced in the truth being preached. But the Holy Spirit gives insight. Those people hoping to make Paul's situation more difficult, why he's in change, it said their motivation was envy, strife, selfish ambition. So the substance of the words uttered was true. But I guess the point is, even when we say things that are true, in the deepest sense, if our motives aren't right, we're still going to go to hell, because if you go to Galatians chapter 5, envy, strife, selfish ambition, what are they? Those are works of the flesh. So there was people that was preaching the truth, but they were doing it with a heart that was part of the work of flesh, like it. They were going to go to hell, even though they were preaching the truth. And it kind of ties into this. They had envy, strife, selfish ambition. So I just think that's what a waste of time.
No, you're right. And as you go back and tying that in to this here, while they may have been speaking the truth, they were motivated by earthly wisdom because it was focused on self, which is the point here. Earthly wisdom's about itself. Again, you got people today in our society that may exalt themselves as being so smart, so wise, and boasting about that, but their wisdom they have is earthly in nature. And they lack the wisdom that is required, which is the heavenly wisdom that we'll get to in just a moment.
Is blinded from the truth. I mean, that's scary. I don't want to see you have that kind of knowledge if it goes against God's word, because not many of those people, according to 1 Corinthians chapter 1, is going to inherit.
Absolutely. Verse 15 now. This wisdom we're talking about, this one that has this bitter envy and self-seeking, this wisdom does not descend from above, but is earthly, sensual, and demonic. So it's earthly. That is, its origin is from earth. It is sensual, not in the sense that it is sexual in nature, but sensual. The idea of the term sensual is that of the beast. It's not from God. It's more that you would find on earth. That of the beast is useless, not wisdom. And then demonic. It's not that from God that we're going to talk about in a minute, but it's that really of the devil that tries to deceive us to thinking we're wise when really we are being foolish. The result of that, verse 16, for where envy and self-seeking is, this confusion and every evil thing are. And so these people think they're wise, but they're envious and self-seeking, and instead of being truly wise, there's confusion and there's every evil thing, because their focus and their wisdom is from below. It's from earth. It's not from above. We then in 17 to 18 talk about heavenly wisdom. And so as we talk about heavenly wisdom, we talk about the same three things. It's character. But the wisdom that is from above is first pure, then peaceable, then gentle, willing to yield, full of mercy and good fruits, without partiality and without hypocrisy. And so its character is the complete opposite. It's pure. It tries to be peaceable. It tries to be gentle. It's willing to yield. It's not like the wisdom that's self-seeking. Instead, this wisdom says, I'm willing to yield to others. It's full of mercy and good fruits, without partiality, and it is without hypocrisy. Here are those wise of the world who say they're wise, but as he pointed out in verse 14, they're lying against the truth. Then over here we've got this wisdom from above. It's without hypocrisy. Verse 18 now, the fruit of righteousness is sown by peace, or in peace, by those who make peace. There's the fruit of righteousness. It's the result of having the true wisdom, the wisdom from above, the wisdom from God. Instead of every evil thing, you've got those who, their fruit of righteousness is sown in peace by those who make peace. Now, they're trying to make peace with man, but ultimately they have peace with God. When Christ returns, as Peter talks about in 2 Peter 3 and in verse 14, that we're diligent to be found by him in peace, spotless and blameless. And so the fruit of righteousness is sown in peace.
We're willing to yield. I have studied some people here some time ago, and the guy was leading the discussion. He said, open to reason. And I think that kind of captures the thought here, because I'm not going to yield if somebody's trying to get me to do something unscriptural, but at the same time, the people agree. Paul's able to reason with those people. And I think that kind of captures the thought with that. They're willing to yield.
Oh, you're right. Oh, you're right. And I think it goes back to the principle of Ephesians as well. In the book of Ephesians, it talks about submitting to others. It's the attitude, it's the opposite of the self-seeking. Self-seeking is putting myself first. Willing to yield is saying I'm willing to put the needs and desires of others above self. That's chapter 3, Wisdom and the Tongue. Our time has gotten away from us this evening. Lord willing, on Sunday morning, we will go into chapter 4, and we'll talk about drawing near to God. Every tear